Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. And hello everyone. Welcome to MLT 435 General Biochemistry. And today's lecture is carbohydrate structure. So these are the following learning objectives. At the end of the session, it is hoped that you'll be able to do the following. The first is to define the following terms, which is monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. And secondly, after defining the terms, it is hoped that you'll be able to explain the structures of the carbohydrates. Okay, this is an overview of what I'm going to cover today. I'll start first by defining what is a carbohydrate, and then I'll be looking closely at monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, polysaccharides, and glycoconjugates. So simplistically, mono means one. So monosaccharide is essentially one sugar. Disaccharide comes from the following term di, which means two. So basically it's a combination of two sugars. Oligosaccharides, the word oligo means few. So there's few sugars combined together. Polysaccharides, the word poly means many. So there's got to be lots and lots and lots of sugars that is combined together. And glycoconjugates come from the word conjugate, which means that your carbohydrate is linked to another molecule. Let's start with carbohydrates. What is carbohydrate? Well, carbohydrate, the term carbo means sugar, and hydrate means that you've got the following molecules. You've got your hydrogen molecules and you've got your oxygen molecules in the same ratio as water. So they are essentially macromolecules that contain carbonyl compounds, which is aldehyde and ketones, and they must contain carbon, they must contain hydrogen, and as I mentioned just now, they must contain oxygen atoms as well. So simplistically, sugar. Another word for carbohydrate is actually saccharides, and they are the most abundant biomolecule on earth. You know, one of the most important macronutrient that your body necessitates, and it is the main and simplest source of energy. It's got a number of functions. Predominantly, it provides energy in the form of ATP. So in that respect, it supports bodily functions, it drives metabolic processes, it regulates your blood glucose, it regulates your insulin. So it's a very important thing to stabilize. Secondly, it stores energy. So energy, for example, glucose that is not being used is stored as glycogen. So essentially, it is used for energy reserve. Thirdly, carbohydrates, they have structural component functions of the cell membranes. They supply carbon atoms for the synthesis of other molecules such as proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And they also build macromolecules and spare protein and fat for other purposes as well. So carbohydrate is a big thing, but it can be broken down into a number of terminologies, as I mentioned just now: monosaccharide, disaccharide, oligosaccharide, and polysaccharide. So monosaccharide consists of one sugar, single polyhydroxyaldehyde or ketone unit. Is a monomer, and it is the basic unit to form big structures such as disaccharide, oligosaccharide, and polysaccharide. So that's the basic unit, your monosaccharides. Then you got your disaccharides, which means that it's two sugars combined or two monosaccharide units combined, and it's linked by a glycosidic bond. And an example of a disaccharide is sucrose, which is a combination of glucose and fructose. Then you got oligosaccharide, which means it's slightly larger than disaccharide, but not as big as polysaccharide. It consists of short chains of monosaccharide units. Kalau disaccharide is two compounds, oligosaccharide can be two or greater. It could be two, it could be three, it could be four, up to 10 monosaccharide units that are joined together by glycosidic bonds. And lastly, you've got your massive compounds, which are polysaccharides, which are essentially polymers containing greater than 20 monosaccharides that are joined together, such as your cellulose, your starch, your chitin. All right, so let's look at all your sugars one by one. Let's start first with monosaccharides. So monosaccharides, as I mentioned just now, it is the basic monomer. It's the simplest form of sugar that cannot be hydrolyzed further. It cannot be split into smaller molecules because they're the basic units by which all carbohydrates are built. And mono means one. All right. So examples of monosaccharide, your basic building units, are glucose, are galactose, and are fructose. Those are examples of your monosaccharides. Right. So your monosaccharides can be classified based on the type of carbonyl group and also the number of carbon atoms, whereby if a monosaccharide consists of aldose, it means that the sugar is with the aldehyde group, whereas ketose, the sugar is with the ketone group. All right? So this is an example of your monosaccharides, your glucose, your galactose, your fructose. So essentially, they have the same identical molecular formula. Is C6H12O6. It's the same. The thing that makes them different is the fact that the orientation is different. The organization is different. I mean, they're isomers in the sense that they have the same unit, but the orientation is different. So if you can look at your glucose and galactose, it's essentially pretty much similar. The only difference is on carbon 4. The fourth carbon, the hydroxyl group, the orientation is slightly different, right? That's the difference between glucose and galactose. If you look glucose and fructose, again, they're isomers. They have the same metabolic formula, but the difference is or lies at, if you look at your glucose, it contains an aldose. Your carbonyl group is actually at the end of the carbon chain, whereas the fructose, you have a ketose, where the carbonyl group is actually in the middle of the carbon chain. So they've got carbonyl groups, but the orientation or organization is different. So that is what makes monosaccharides unique. They look like they're the same, but if you look closely, they're not. You have to look at this level to actually see the difference between the three monosaccharides, right? Either the orientation or the organization of the carbonyl group, either at the end or in the middle. Right? Okay, so let us explore disaccharides. Right? What is the meaning of disaccharides? Disaccharide means when you've got two sugars that are combined together. So you've got two monosaccharides or two simple sugars that are combined together to form one single sugar that is linked by a glycosidic linkage bond. All right. Examples of disaccharides are glucose, lactose, maltose, and cellulose. Sucrose is essentially a combination of glucose and fructose. Lactose is a combination of glucose and galactose, whereas maltose and cellulose, they are both glucose and glucose. Alright, since they are a combination of two sugars, you can expect them to be larger than monosaccharides, and you can look at here, that is basically sucrose, that's basically lactose, and that's basically maltose. So they join according to the corresponding sugar. For example, sucrose just now with fructose, galactose just now with lactose, and maltose just now glucose and glucose. So it's a combination of two sugars, and you can have your glycosidic bonds that join them together. So what's the difference between disaccharides? One of the most important properties is that some are reducing sugars and some are non-reducing sugars. Reducing sugars means that they have a reactive carbonyl group or anomeric carbon that can be oxidized. Example of reducing sugars are glucose, lactose, maltose, and cellulose. And you can actually detect this in the lab. You can use a Benedict's reagent and you can see the color change from blue to red or red orangey in color to show that oxidation has taken place. That is reducing sugar. But non-reducing sugar, you can't see that. An example of that is basically sucrose. You can also test this in the lab as well. All right. Okay, let us explore oligosaccharides. So oligosaccharides are carbohydrates or sugars that contain few numbers of monosaccharides. All right, kalau disaccharide it was 2 just now. This could be 2 or greater than 2 up to 10 units of sugars combined together and joined by glycosidic bonds. Okay, an example is raffinose or stachyose. This is the structure of raffinose, which consists of glucose, fructose, and galactose. So it's more than two. So it's bigger than disaccharide, but obviously much smaller than polysaccharide. So it's got three sugars combined together because oligo means few. And the function of this particular carbohydrate is for cell recognition purposes and adhesion functions as well. Right? Lastly, polysaccharides. Okay, poly, as the name suggests, means many sugars. It's got long chains of monosaccharides greater than 10 joined together by glycosidic bonds. All right, it's just the number of sugars that's combined that differentiates between disaccharide, oligosaccharide, and polysaccharide. It's just the numbers that differentiate. So it's got, it can be divided in two classes. You've got your homoglycans and heteroglycans. Homoglycans is composed of one type of monosaccharide. Hetero means more than one. So it is a combination of different types of monosaccharides. And interestingly about polysaccharides, they've got specific functions. Starch and glycogen, they function as storage polysaccharides, whereas cellulose and chitin, they're not so much for storage, they're more for structural purposes. They're structural polysaccharides. Right? So these are your storage polysaccharides, as I mentioned just now, starch and glycogen. The main difference is starch is a storage polysaccharide that you can find in plants and fungi, whereas glycogen is a storage polysaccharide that is found in animals. The second major difference is its constituents. Starch is actually made up of a combination of amylose and amylopectin, whereas glycogen is made out of branch polymer of glucose residues. So it's actually quite complex in terms of its structure because it's got many sugars, and these are some illustrations of what you can imagine starch to look like because it's a combination of amylose and amylopectin. Okay, so that was basically storage polysaccharide, whereas cellulose and chitins, there are structural polysaccharides. So cellulose is made out of straight chains of homoglycan of glucose with alternating glucose molecules, whereas chitin is actually a more linear polymer that's made out of N-acetylglucosamine residues. And in between them, both cellulose and chitin, you've got your hydrogen bonds that holds them together, that makes them more strong and more rigid in nature. All right, so this is how cellulose and chitin looks like. Right, and that's it. That's basically your monosaccharide, disaccharide, oligosaccharide, and polysaccharide. So lastly, let's talk about glycoconjugate. Right, glycoconjugate means it's got a conjugate. It's linked to something else. So essentially, there are carbohydrates that are covalently linked to other biological molecules. So they can be linked to amino acids, they can be linked to proteins, they can be linked to lipids, and they can also be linked to other molecules as well. So carbohydrates that are linked to amino acid generates peptidoglycans. If they are joined to proteins, they can make up glycopeptides and glycoproteins. If they are combined with lipids, they can make up glycolipids and lipopolysaccharide. And example of other molecules include glycosides. All right. So that's it. Let's just wrap up. This is essentially what carbohydrate is all about in a nutshell. It is divided into monosaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. Mono means one, saccharides means sugar, oligo means short, poly means many. And these are examples. Examples of monosaccharides include glucose, fructose, galactose. For oligosaccharides, examples include sucrose, lactose, maltose. And polysaccharide, examples of which include starch, glycogen, and cellulose. All right. So the bigger the structure, obviously the complex is its makeup. Monosaccharides are very simple monomers, so you can actually just imagine that they are single units. Disaccharide is much more bigger than monosaccharides, but when you come to polysaccharide, they're massive because it's a combination of lots and lots of sugars combined to one. All right. So I think that's it from me. Thank you very, very much for your kind attention. Should you have any other queries or if you want to elaborate further, please do contact us. Inshallah, we'll be very happy to assist you. So that's it. Thank you and all the best.